The colony ship Frontier dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the green and blue world that humanity called New Haven. And Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the planet grow larger on the viewing screen, thinking about the 12,000 colonists in the ships behind him who would finally have a home among the stars. 6 months had passed since Earth joined the Galactic Council as the newest member species, and the Council had promised humanity 3 worlds for colonization as part of the agreement. And New Haven was the first, a beautiful planet with oceans and forests that reminded everyone of Earth. Captain, I am detecting something unusual, said Lieutenant Kevin Hayes from the sensor station. His voice tight with concern. Jake turned from the screen and walked to the sensor display, looking at the readings that showed multiple structures on the planet's surface where there should have been nothing but wilderness. Those are military installations, Jake said quietly, feeling his stomach tighten with worry. Dr. Lisa Grant, the chief medical officer and xenobiologist, came to stand beside him and studied the sensor data with her sharp eyes. Those energy signatures match Kryn Empire technology, she said. And Jake heard the fear in her voice because everyone in the fleet knew about the Kryn, a warrior species that controlled dozens of star systems and held significant power in the Galactic Council. Jake opened the communication channel to the planet and waited, hoping there was some explanation for why Kryn forces occupied the world that belonged to humanity. A reptilian face appeared on the screen, covered in dark green scales with yellow eyes that looked at Jake with barely concealed contempt. I am Commander Jarek of the Kryn Empire, the alien said in the common galactic language that all species used for communication. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human colony ship Frontier, Jake replied, keeping his voice calm and professional. We were assigned this world by the Galactic Council for human colonization. Jarek made a sound that might have been laughter, harsh and mocking. The world has been reassigned due to administrative error, the Kryn commander said without any hint of apology. The Council has given New Haven to the Kryn Empire, and you will depart immediately. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but forced himself to stay calm because starting a conflict would endanger all the colonists. Commander, we have documentation from the Council showing this world belongs to humanity, Jake said. There must be some mistake, and I request permission to contact the Council to resolve this matter. There is no mistake, Jarek said, his voice growing harder. You have 1 hour to leave this system or we will consider your presence an act of aggression. The communication cut off before Jake could respond, and he stood staring at the blank screen while his mind raced through the limited options available to him. Get me Ambassador Paul Henderson at the Council headquarters, Jake ordered, and the communications officer quickly established a connection to the massive space station where the Galactic Council met. Ambassador Henderson appeared on the screen, a middle-aged man with gray hair and tired eyes who had spent months trying to navigate the complex politics of galactic diplomacy. Jake quickly explained the situation while Henderson's expression grew more and more troubled. Let me contact the Council immediately, Henderson said. Do not engage with the Kryn forces, and keep your ships at a safe distance until I can sort this out. Jake ordered the fleet to move away from the planet while they waited for Henderson to resolve the situation through official channels. And the hours passed slowly while 12,000 colonists waited in their ships, wondering what would happen to the new lives they had planned. Henderson called back after 3 hours, and Jake knew from his expression that the news was bad. The Council claims there was an administrative reassignment of New Haven to the Kryn Empire 2 weeks ago, Henderson said, his voice heavy with frustration. They say they sent notification to Earth, but we never received any such message. That is impossible, Jake said. We left Earth 5 weeks ago with full authorization to colonize New Haven. I know, Henderson replied. But the Council insists the reassignment is legitimate, and they are suggesting we accept one of the alternate worlds. They are offering as compensation. Jake looked at the planet on his screen. The world that should have been humanity's first real home among the stars. Now taken by the Kryn without any real explanation. What if we refuse to leave? Jake asked quietly. Henderson shook his head slowly. The Kryn have a fleet in the system, he said. We do not have the military strength to challenge them, and the Council will not support us in a conflict. Jake was about to respond when alarms suddenly blared across the bridge, and the sensor officer shouted a warning. Multiple weapons locked onto our ships, the officer yelled on the screen. Jake saw dozens of energy signatures racing toward the colony fleet, and he had only seconds to realize that the Kryn were firing on civilian vessels without any warning. Evasive maneuvers, Jake shouted. But colony ships were not built for combat, and they moved too slowly to avoid the incoming fire. The first missile struck the colony ship New Dawn, and Jake watched in horror as the vessel exploded in a brilliant flash of light that faded quickly into the darkness of space too. More colony ships died in the next minute, torn apart by Kryn weapons while they tried desperately to escape. And Jake ordered all ships to jump to faster-than-light travel, even though emergency. Jumps were dangerous and could destroy the engines. The Frontier shook violently as the engines engaged. And the last thing Jake saw before the ship jumped was another colony vessel breaking apart under enemy fire, spilling thousands of people into the cold vacuum of space when the fleet emerged from the emergency jump 3 light years away. Jake immediately ordered a count of the surviving ships, and the report came back like a knife to his heart. 3 colony ships destroyed, 12,347 people dead, including entire families who had sold everything they owned for the chance to start new lives on New Haven DR. Grant stood beside Jake with tears streaming down her face as she read the names of the medical staff who had died on the destroyed ships. People she had trained and worked with for months during the journey. They fired on civilians without any warning, she said, her voice shaking with grief and rage. They murdered children. Jake contacted Ambassador Henderson again and showed him the footage from the attack. The recordings that proved the Kryn had deliberately targeted unarmed colony vessels. Henderson's face went pale as he watched the video, and he promised to bring the evidence before the full Galactic Council immediately 2 days later. Henderson called with the Council's response, and Jake could see the ambassador was barely controlling his anger. The Council has reviewed the evidence, Henderson said. Director Vexter expressed regret over the loss of life and called it a regrettable misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Jake repeated, unable to believe what he was hearing. They claimed the Kryn forces thought the colony ships were military vessels that refused to leave after being warned. Henderson continued. Vexter suggested that humanity accept compensation for the lost ships and move on from this incident. Move on, Dr. Grant said from behind Jake, her voice cold with fury. They want us to move on from the murder of 12,000 people. Henderson nodded slowly. I tried to demand a formal investigation and justice, he said. But the other council members support Vexter, and they made it clear that humanity lacks the military standing to challenge the Kryn Empire over this matter. Jake understood then that the council saw humanity as weak and expendable, a minor species that could be dismissed and ignored when it suited the interests of more powerful members. What are you going to do? Jake asked quietly. Henderson looked directly into the camera with eyes that burned with cold determination. I am sending a message to Earth, he said. They think we are weak and will accept this injustice. But they are about to learn what humanity does to those who murder our children. The transmission ended, and Jake stood on the bridge of the frontier surrounded by the survivors of the massacre, knowing that everything was about to change. Admiral Karen Wright stood in the command center deep beneath Earth's military headquarters, and watched the holographic display showing the positions of every human ship in known space. And she felt the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. The emergency council had been meeting for 3 days straight since Captain Morrison and the survivors of the New Haven massacre returned to Earth, and the entire planet burned with rage over the deaths of 12,000 colonists. Director Chris Bennett from the Human Intelligence Agency stood beside her, his face showing the exhaustion of 72 hours without sleep. "The public wants war," he said quietly. "Every news channel is showing the footage of those colony ships being destroyed, and people are demanding we strike back at the Kryn Empire. War would be suicide," Admiral Wright replied, her voice calm despite the anger she felt inside. "The Kryn control 40 star systems and have a military fleet 10 times larger than ours, and if we attack them directly, they will destroy Earth." General Nathan Cole entered the command center carrying a data tablet filled with strategic analysis, and his expression was grim. "I have run every scenario," he said. "In a prolonged war against the Kryn Empire, humanity loses within 6 months, and that is the optimistic projection." Ambassador Henderson had been recalled from the council station and now sat at the conference table looking older than he had just days before. "So we do nothing," he said bitterly. "We let them murder our people and accept their apology." "I did not say we do nothing," Admiral Wright replied, and something in her voice made everyone in the room look at her with sudden attention. "Director Bennett, please share what your intelligence division has discovered." Bennett activated the holographic display and dozens of files appeared in the air, each one containing detailed information about the military capabilities of every species in the Galactic Council. "Since humanity joined the Council 6 months ago, we have been studying every species we encountered," Bennett explained. "We analyzed their technology, their military strategies, their supply lines, and most importantly, their weaknesses." He pulled up a file on the Kryn Empire and highlighted several sections. "The Kryn believe they are invincible because they have never lost a major conflict," Bennett continued. "But their shield technology has a critical flaw, and their command structure is highly centralized, meaning if you cut off the head, the body stops functioning." General Cole stepped forward and added his analysis. "We cannot win a galactic war," he said, "but we can execute a perfect surgical strike that demonstrates our capabilities and forces the Council to take us seriously." "You want to attack a Kryn military target," Henderson said slowly. "Understanding the plan, not just any target," Admiral Wright replied, pulling up an image of a massive space station orbiting a red giant star, Fortress Prime, the command center for the entire Kryn military fleet. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the station. A structure so large it could house 500,000 people, and so heavily defended that no enemy had ever come within a light year of it. "That is impossible," Henderson finally said. "Fortress Prime is considered the most secure military installation in the galaxy. It is considered secure because no one has ever tried to attack it," Wright said. "The Kryn believe their reputation alone protects them, and they have grown complacent." Dr. Lisa Grant had been brought to Earth to share her analysis of Kryn technology from the attack, and she now stood to present her findings. "I studied the energy signatures from the weapons that destroyed our colony ships," she said, activating her own display. "The Kryn shields operate on a rotating frequency pattern that they believe makes them impossible to penetrate. But I found the exact timing of the rotation." She showed a series of calculations that meant nothing to most people in the room but everything to the military engineers. "If we modify our weapons to fire at this specific frequency during the rotation gap, their shields will collapse completely," Grant explained. "It will take us approximately 3 weeks to retrofit our entire fleet." Admiral Wright looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leadership and saw the same cold determination in every expression. "Here is what I propose," she said. "We prepare in complete silence for 3 months. We retrofit every ship in our fleet. We map every detail of Fortress Prime's defenses. And then we strike with overwhelming force. And after we take the station," Henderson asked, "we demand the Council investigate the New Haven massacre properly," Wright replied. "We demand justice for our dead. And we demonstrate that humanity is not a weak species that can be pushed around. The other Council species will see this as an act of war." Someone said from the back of the room. "Let them," Wright said coldly. "We tried peace, and they ignored us, and now they will learn that humanity protects its own." The decision was made that day, and Earth began the most intense military preparation in human history. Working in total secrecy while the rest of the galaxy assumed humanity had accepted the Council's decision, Admiral Wright ordered every human diplomat and citizen recalled from Council space over the next 2 weeks. Using various official excuses about administrative, reorganization, and policy reviews, the other species noticed the withdrawal and whispered among themselves that humanity was retreating in fear. Too weak to maintain a presence among the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. The Kryn Empire in particular celebrated what they saw as a victory, and Commander Zarek received a promotion for his successful acquisition of New Haven. And Kryn military leaders began eyeing other human colonial claims with interest. Meanwhile, in orbital shipyards around Earth and Mars, engineers worked around the clock to modify every weapon system in the human fleet based on Dr. Grant's research. The work was exhausting and dangerous, and 3 engineers died in accidents during the rush modifications. But no one complained, because everyone understood what was at stake. General Cole's strategic teams studied every piece of intelligence about Fortress Prime that had been gathered over the months, building detailed models of the station's layout and defensive systems. They identified the exact positions of every weapon platform, every shield generator, and every critical system that would need to be destroyed in the opening minutes of the attack. Captain Morrison volunteered to lead a Marine boarding team, and Admiral Wright accepted because he had earned the right to be part of the mission after what he had witnessed. The Marines trained for weeks on mock-ups of Fortress Prime's interior, practicing the exact movements they would need to capture the station's command center with minimal casualties. Dr. Grant worked with the weapons specialists, fine-tuning the frequency of every missile and energy beam to ensure the Kryn shields would fail exactly as predicted. "We will only get one chance at this," she told Admiral Wright during one of their planning sessions. "If the Kryn detect the frequency and adjust their shields, the entire attack will fail. Then we make sure the first shot counts," Wright replied. As the weeks passed, the human fleet gathered in the outer solar system far from the normal shipping lanes, where Council observers might detect the buildup 147 warships. Every combat vessel that Earth and her colonies could muster assembled in formation and waited for the final order. Ambassador Henderson spent his time reviewing the legal documents he would present to the Council. The evidence of the massacre, combined with humanity's demands for justice. "Do you think they will listen?" he asked Admiral Wright the day before the fleet was scheduled to depart. "They will listen when we are standing on Fortress Prime with their high command in custody," Wright replied. "Power is the only language the Council truly understands." The night before the attack, Admiral Wright addressed the entire fleet over a secure channel, and her words were broadcast to every ship simultaneously. "We are not going to war," she said. "We are going to deliver justice for 12,000 people who were murdered while seeking a peaceful new life. And we are going to show the galaxy that humanity deserves respect." She paused and looked at the camera with eyes that burned with cold fire. "The Council thinks we are weak because we are new to the stars," she continued. They think we will accept whatever scraps they throw us and be grateful for the privilege. But they are wrong. Tomorrow we strike Fortress Prime, Wright said. We will do it quickly. We will do it perfectly. And we will show every species in the galaxy what happens when you underestimate humanity. The fleet departed in complete radio silence 30 minutes later, jumping the faster-than-light travel on a course that would bring them to Fortress Prime in 18 hours. The Galactic Council had no idea what was coming, and the Kryn Empire continued its celebrations, completely unaware that humanity was about to change the balance of galactic power forever in the command center on Earth. Director Bennett watched the fleet disappear from sensors and turned to the empty room. There is no going back now, he said quietly to himself across the galaxy at Council headquarters. Director Vexter filed away the final reports on the New Haven incident and marked the matter as closed. Satisfied that humanity had learned its place in the galactic order, he had no way of knowing that in less than a day, everything he believed about humanity would be shattered along with the myth of Kryn invincibility. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, just outside the defensive perimeter of Fortress Prime. And Admiral Karen Wright watched the massive station fill her viewing screen while her tactical officer began the attack countdown. Commander Jarek was in the station's command center reviewing supply reports when the alarms began screaming, and he looked up at the tactical display with confusion turning rapidly to disbelief. "Report," he shouted at his sensor. "Officer, 147 human vessels have appeared at the edge of our defensive zone," the officer reported, his voice shaking slightly. "They are moving into attack formation." Jarek stared at the display for 3 full seconds before he started laughing, a harsh sound that echoed through the command center. "The humans dare to attack Fortress Prime," he said with amusement. "Raise shields and prepare all weapon platforms. And we will teach these primitives why no one challenges the Kryn Empire on the bridge of her flagship." Admiral Wright listened to the communications her intelligence team was intercepting from the station, and she heard the mockery in Jarek's voice. "They still think we are weak," she said to Commander Alex Turner. "A tactical officer. Their mistake," Turner replied, his fingers moving across the weapons control panel. "All ships report ready to fire on your command." Lieutenant Maria Santos sat at the weapons station with her hand hovering over the firing controls, and her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the countdown timer. Fortress Prime shields came online, a shimmering energy field that surrounded the entire station and had never been penetrated by enemy fire in the 300 years since the station was built. Shields at full strength. Jarek's tactical officer reported, "All weapons locked onto the human fleet. Fire a warning shot across their formation," Jarek ordered. "Show them what real military power looks like before we destroy them." A massive energy beam lanced out from Fortress Prime toward the human ships, a demonstration of the station's firepower that should have sent any sane enemy running. Admiral Wright watched the beam pass harmlessly through empty space where her ships had been positioned seconds before. "All ships execute. Attack pattern Delta," she ordered calmly. "Fire on my mark." The human fleet moved with precision that shocked the Kryn observers, each ship taking up an exact position around Fortress Prime in a formation that had been practiced hundreds of times. "What are they doing?" Jarek muttered, watching the human vessels surround his station. "Mark," Admiral Wright said quietly. 147 ships fired simultaneously, and every weapon had been tuned to the exact frequency that Dr. Grant had calculated would collapse the Kryn shields. The energy beams struck Fortress Prime shields, and for one brief moment, nothing happened. And then the entire shield array flickered and died in the command center. Jarek watched his shield display go dark with an expression of complete shock. "Shields are offline," his tactical officer shouted in panic. All defensive fields have collapsed. That is impossible, Jarek said. But even as he spoke, the second wave of human weapons fire struck the station's hull directly fortress. Prime shook violently as explosions rippled across its surface, and the weapon platforms that ringed the station began exploding one after another as human missiles found their targets with perfect accuracy. "Return fire," Jarek screamed. "Destroy those ships." But the Kryn gunners found that the human vessels moved faster and more unpredictably than any enemy they had ever faced. And their shots missed more often than they hit. Lieutenant Santos watched her targeting display and fired again and again, each shot destroying another of Fortress Prime's defensive weapons. Station weapons at 40% capacity. Turner reported 30%, 20%, 90 seconds after the attack began. Fortress Prime had lost all of its external weapons, and the station hung in space defenseless for the first time in its history. "Commence boarding operation," Admiral Wright ordered. "Captain Morrison, your Marines are cleared to launch." Captain Jake Morrison sat in the lead assault shuttle with 40 Marines behind him. And when the launch order came, he felt the shuttle kick away from the carrier ship and accelerate toward Fortress Prime. 20 assault shuttles raced toward the crippled station, and the Kryn defenders inside scrambled to prepare for an enemy they never imagined would reach their hulls. The shuttles attached to Fortress Prime's hull like parasites, and the Marines cut through the outer armor with plasma torches, while the Kryn inside organized a defense. Morrison was the first one through the breach, his rifle ready as he entered a wide corridor filled with Kryn warriors waiting with their own weapons. The firefight that followed was brief and brutal, and the Kryn quickly discovered that human soldiers moved faster and hit harder than they expected. Morrison's team pushed forward through the station, following the maps that intelligence had provided and heading toward the command center where Jarek waited. They encountered resistance at every junction, but the Marines had trained for months for this exact scenario, and they moved through Fortress Prime like precision instruments. Hari watched the security displays as human soldiers fought their way deeper into his station, and he could not believe what he was seeing. "How are they this good?" he said to no one in particular. "They are supposed to be primitive." His second-in-command looked at him with fear in his eyes. "They studied us," the officer said quietly. "They learned everything about our tactics and our technology, and they planned this attack perfectly." Jarek felt cold understanding wash over him, realizing too late that humanity's silence after the New Haven massacre had not been weakness, but careful preparation. "Send a message to the Council," he ordered. "Tell them Fortress Prime is under attack and request immediate assistance." The communications officer tried to comply, but found that human jamming technology had blocked all outgoing transmissions from the station. Morrison and his Marines reached the command center after 3 hours of fighting through the station, and they found Jarek standing with his remaining officers and a dozen guards. "Surrender, and you will not be harmed," Morrison called out in the common language. His rifle aimed at the Kryn commander. Jarek looked at the human captain with hatred and fear mixed together in his expression. "You cannot do this," he said. "The Council will destroy your entire species for this attack. The Council ignored us when you murdered 12,000 civilians," Morrison replied coldly. "Now they will listen when we demand justice." The Kryn guards raised their weapons, and Morrison's Marines opened fire in response. And the brief firefight ended with all the guards dead and Jarek kneeling on the floor with his hands bound. Admiral Wright received a message from Morrison that the command center was secured, and she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "Send the broadcast," she ordered her communications officer. "I want every species in the galaxy to hear this." The message went out on all frequencies, cutting through the normal galactic communications like a knife. "This is Admiral Karen Wright of the human fleet." The broadcast began. "We have taken control of Fortress Prime and captured the entire Kryn High Command. And we did this in response to the massacre of 12,000 human civilians at New Haven, across the galaxy. Thousands of species heard the message and could not believe what they were hearing. Humanity tried to seek justice through the Galactic Council, Wright continued. The Council dismissed our complaint and called the deaths of our people a regrettable misunderstanding. And now we are taking matters into our own hands. At Council headquarters, Director Vexter was pulled from a diplomatic dinner by urgent messages from his staff, and he rushed to the council chambers where other members were already gathering in confusion. "Is this real?" Councilor Cha asked, her insectoid features showing deep concern. Have the humans actually captured Fortress Prime? Vexter pulled up the confirmed reports from observers near the station, and his hand shook slightly as he read the details. "It appears to be true," he said quietly. "The humans attacked with their entire fleet and defeated the Kryn defenses in under 4 hours. How is that possible?" Another counselor demanded. "The Kryn are one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, because we underestimated the humans," Shah said, her voice carrying an edge of accusation. "We treated them as weak and primitive, and they proved us wrong." Admiral Wright's broadcast continued, her voice calm and measured. "We are calling for an emergency session of the Galactic Council to address the New Haven massacre properly," she said. "Humanity is willing to negotiate the return of Fortress Prime and all prisoners, but we will no longer accept being dismissed and ignored." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a warning that sent chills through everyone listening. "The Council should also be aware that our intelligence division has studied every major species in the galaxy," Wright said. "We know the weaknesses in your shields, the gaps in your defenses, and the vulnerabilities in your command structures. And we can do this peacefully, or we can demonstrate what else we learned." The broadcast ended, and the Galactic Council chamber erupted in chaos as counselors shouted over each other, demanding explanations and proposing responses. Vexter stood at the center of the storm and realized with growing horror that everything had. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after Admiral Wright's broadcast. And Ambassador Paul Henderson stood before 300 counselors representing every major species in known space, while the tension in the chamber felt thick, enough to cut. Director Vexter sat at the head of the council table, his reptilian features showing barely controlled anger as he called the session to order. "Ambassador Henderson," Vexter began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "your species has committed an unprecedented act of aggression against a council member, and we demand that you release all prisoners and withdraw from Fortress Prime immediately." Henderson stood calmly at the speaker's podium, and behind him on a large display screen, Commander Jarek appeared in handcuffs, with human guards on either side, the sight of a Kryn military commander as a prisoner shocked many of the counselors who had believed the Kryn were invincible. "Director Vexter, I would like to present evidence to the council," Henderson said quietly. "Ignoring the demand, this council is not interested in your excuses," Vexter snapped. "You will comply with our orders or face the combined military response of every council species." Counselor Chia, the insectoid representative who had always been known for her fairness, raised one of her multi-jointed limbs. "I would like to hear what the human ambassador has to say," she said in her clicking voice. "We should understand what drove humanity to such extreme action." Several other counselors voiced agreement, and Vexter reluctantly nodded for Henderson to continue. Henderson activated the display and showed the footage from the New Haven massacre, the same evidence he had presented weeks ago. That the council had dismissed. The chamber fell silent as counselors watched human colony ships being destroyed without warning, watched the explosions that killed thousands of civilians, watched bodies tumbling through space. Some counselors had seen this footage before, but many had not. And the reality of what happened struck them with new force. 12,347 humans died that day, Henderson said quietly when the footage ended. Among them were 4,200 children under the age of 15. He pulled up images of families who had been on the destroyed ships, showing the faces of people who would never reach their new home. These were not soldiers, Henderson continued. They were farmers and teachers and engineers, and they were murdered while trying to exercise the colonization rights that this council had promised them. Ambassador Kelrick of the peaceful Lothany species looked at the images with visible distress. We were aware of the incident, Kelrick said softly. But the council leadership assured us it was a territorial dispute that had been resolved. It was not resolved, Henderson replied, his voice hardening. We brought this evidence to the council immediately after the attack, and Director Vexter called it a regrettable misunderstanding and suggested we accept compensation and move on. He turned to look directly at Vexter. We tried to seek justice through proper channels. Henderson said, the council dismissed us because we are new and lack military power, and you believed we would simply accept the deaths of our people without consequence. Vexter shifted uncomfortably under the stares of the other counselors. The matter was complicated, he said defensively. The Kryn claimed the colony ships refused to leave after being warned, and there were questions about the legitimacy of the colonization rights. There were no questions, Henderson said sharply. Humanity had full legal authority to colonize New Haven, and the Kryn attacked civilian vessels without any warning or provocation. He activated another display showing communication logs from the attack. Captain Morrison attempted peaceful negotiation. Henderson explained. Commander Jarek gave him 1 hour to leave, and then opened fire after only 40 minutes without any additional warning. The evidence was clear and undeniable, and many counselors began speaking among themselves in their various languages. Even if your grievance is legitimate, Vexter said, trying to regain control of the session. Your attack on Fortress Prime violates every principle of galactic law and cannot be tolerated. Which law? Henderson asked quietly. The law that allowed 12,000 civilians to be murdered without consequence, or the law that gives powerful species the right to ignore justice when it suits their interests. The question hung in the air, and no one answered immediately. Counselor Sci-Fi stood and addressed the chamber directly. I must confess that I have been troubled by this matter since the ambassador first presented his evidence, she said. The council has failed in its duty to protect member species, and we dismissed a legitimate complaint because we did not take humanity seriously. The Lothany also observed the council's treatment of this matter, Ambassador Kelrick added, and we were concerned that justice was being sacrificed for political convenience. Other counselors began speaking up, some defending Vexter's handling of the situation while others questioned whether the council had indeed failed in its responsibilities. Henderson waited for the arguments to quiet before speaking again. Humanity is not interested in conquest or domination, he said. We do not want war with the Kryn Empire or any other species, but we will not accept being treated as second-class members of this council. He gestured to the display showing Fortress Prime with human ships surrounding it. Admiral Wright is prepared to return the station and all prisoners. Henderson continued, but humanity has 3 conditions that are not negotiable. You are not in a position to make demands, Vexter started to say, but Henderson cut him off. We are in a position to demonstrate what else our intelligence division learned about council military capabilities, Henderson said coldly. Admiral Wright has detailed analysis of defensive weaknesses for every major species, and she can strike any target in council space with the same precision she used against Fortress Prime. The threat was clear, and the chamber erupted in angry voices demanding to know how humanity had gathered such intelligence. Admiral Wright's voice suddenly filled the chamber. Broadcast directly from Fortress Prime, We gathered the information the same way any intelligent species would, she said. We watched, we listened, and we analyzed everything we saw during our first 6 months as council members. She appeared on the main display, standing in the captured command center with human marines visible behind her. Every species assumed we were too primitive to understand advanced technology, Wright continued. You spoke freely around our diplomats and showed off your military capabilities without any concern that we might use that information. Henderson saw several counselors looking uncomfortable as they realized their own carelessness had contributed to the current situation. Here are humanity's 3 conditions, Henderson said, bringing the discussion back to the main point. First, the Council will conduct a formal investigation of the New Haven massacre with representatives from neutral species who have no political ties to the Kryn Empire. He held up a second finger. Second, the Kryn Empire will pay full reparations to the families of every person killed at New Haven, including compensation for lost property and future earnings. A third finger. Third, the Council will establish a Justice Commission with the authority to investigate complaints from all member species equally, regardless of their military or political power. The chamber fell silent as counselors absorbed the demands, and Henderson saw many of them exchanging glances. If these conditions are met, Henderson concluded, humanity will return Fortress Prime undamaged, release all prisoners unharmed, and continue our membership in this council as peaceful partners in galactic civilization. And if we refuse, Vexter asked, Admiral Wright answered from the display, then we will keep Fortress Prime as the first human military base outside our solar system, she said calmly, and we will demonstrate to every species in the galaxy that the Council cannot protect its members from a determined enemy. She paused before adding the final warning. We prefer cooperation, but we are prepared for conflict, Wright said. The choice belongs to the Council. Vexter called for a recess, and the counselors retreated to private chambers to discuss the situation. Henderson remained at the podium, and Counselor Cha approached him with what might have been respect in her alien features. You have given the Council much to consider, she said quietly. Your species has demonstrated remarkable capability and restraint, and many of us recognize that justice was denied to your people. Will it be enough? Henderson asked. I cannot speak for the full Council, Chaish replied, but I will advocate for your conditions, and I believe others will join me. Over the next 3 days, the Council debated behind closed doors while humanity waited with ships surrounding Fortress Prime. Some counselors argued for military action against humanity, but when analysts reviewed the intelligence Wright had gathered, they realized any conflict with Earth would be far more costly than anyone had imagined. Other species began coming forward with their own stories of being dismissed by the Council. Incidents where powerful members had taken advantage of weaker species without consequence. The whispered complaints grew into open discussions about the need for Council reform. And Shaw found herself leading a coalition of moderate species who saw humanity's action as a catalyst for necessary change. On the 4th day, Vexter reconvened. 3 weeks after the Council vote, Admiral Karen Wright stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched as Fortress Prime was formally returned to Kryn control. And she felt both satisfaction and relief that humanity had achieved its goals without starting a galactic war. The investigation into the New Haven massacre had concluded with exactly the findings that humanity expected, and the evidence proved beyond any doubt that Commander Jarek had acted with premeditation rather than responding to any legitimate threats. Jarek now sat in a Kryn prison awaiting trial for war crimes, and his career as a military commander was permanently finished. The Kryn Empire had paid reparations totaling 5 billion credits to the families of the massacre victims, a sum so large that it sent shockwaves through their economy and served as a warning to other species who might consider attacking weaker council members' captain. Jake Morrison had volunteered to help distribute the reparations, and he spent weeks meeting with families who had lost loved ones at New Haven. The meetings were difficult and emotionally draining, but Morrison felt he owed it to the victims to see their families receive some measure of compensation. No amount of money will bring them back, one father told Morrison, holding a photograph of his 2 children who had died on the colony ship New Dawn. But knowing that their deaths led to changes that will protect others gives me some comfort. Morrison could only nod and share the man's grief, knowing that the father was right about both the inadequacy of money and the importance of the changes that followed. The most significant change came with the establishment of the Justice Commission, an independent body with authority to investigate complaints from any council member, regardless of their political or military power counselor. Shaw had been appointed as the first Justice Commissioner, and she took the role with serious dedication. Her office received over 200 formal complaints in the first month alone, as species who had been suffering in silence finally found a mechanism to seek justice. I had no idea the scope of the problems, Shaw told Ambassador Henderson during one of their regular meetings. So many smaller species have been taken advantage of by the powerful, and the council simply ignored their complaints. That is what happens when justice becomes selective, Henderson replied. Power without accountability always leads to abuse. Shaw activated a display showing the cases her commission was investigating, ranging from territorial disputes to trade violations to incidents of violence against civilians. Your species has given the galaxy an opportunity to be better, she said. I hope we do not waste it. Henderson had been negotiating humanity's new status within the council, and the final agreement elevated Earth to a permanent seat on the Security Council. It was an unprecedented rise for a species that had been a member for less than a year. But no one could argue that humanity had not earned the position. Dr. Lisa Grant had returned to her work as a xenobiologist, but she now led a scientific exchange program that allowed human researchers to collaborate with alien scientists from dozens of species. Program had produced remarkable advances in medical technology and environmental science, and it demonstrated that humanity's value to the galaxy extended far beyond military capability. We learn more by working together than we ever could in isolation, Grant told a conference of galactic scientists. Our species may have different biology and different cultures, but we share the same desire to understand the universe. The response to her speech was enthusiastic, and Grant found herself invited to research facilities across the galaxy. Admiral Wright had chosen to remain in command of Earth's defense fleet, but the fleet itself had changed in character. Rather than preparing for war, human ships now participated in joint training exercises with other council species who wanted to learn from Earth's tactical innovations. They respect us now, Commander Alex Turner observed during one such exercise. Not because they fear us, but because we proved we could be both strong and fair. Wright nodded in agreement. Respect earned through strength is temporary, she said. Respect earned through justice lasts. Lieutenant Maria Santos had been promoted and now served as a liaison officer, helping other species improve their defensive technologies. She discovered that many council members were genuinely interested in cooperation once they understood that humanity sought partnership rather than dominance. We spent so long assuming you were primitive, one alien engineer told her. And now we realize you were observing us and learning while we underestimated you. That is the advantage of being underestimated, Santos replied with a slight smile. People reveal more than they intend. The most surprising development came from the Kryn Empire itself, where a reform movement had emerged in response to the Fortress Prime incident. Younger Kryn military officers who had studied the human attack recognized that their Empire's rigid thinking and overconfidence had made them vulnerable. These reformers pushed for changes in Kryn, military doctrine, and diplomatic policy, arguing that strength without wisdom was a liability. Rather than an asset, Director Vexter had privately approached Henderson to acknowledge that the Council's handling of the New Haven massacre had been a failure. I allowed political considerations to override justice, Vexter admitted, and it nearly led to a war that would have destroyed us all. Henderson appreciated the honesty, even as he remained cautious about Vexter's motives. The question is whether the Council will truly change, Henderson said, or whether this will be forgotten once the immediate crisis passes. That depends on species like yours continuing to hold us accountable. Vexter replied, the Council needs members who refuse to accept injustice. 6 months after the Fortress Prime incident, humanity held a memorial service on Earth for the victims of the New Haven massacre. 12,347 names were inscribed on a monument built near the spaceport where the colony ships had departed, and representatives from dozens of alien species attended the ceremony. Captain Morrison read the names aloud, a process that took over 8 hours, and he insisted on speaking every single one so that the victims would not be forgotten. Ambassador Kelrick of the Lothany gave a speech honoring the victims and acknowledging that their deaths had led to reforms that would protect countless others. These people did not choose to be martyrs, Kelrick said, his voice filled with emotion, but their sacrifice has made the galaxy more just, and we owe it to their memory to ensure these changes become permanent. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence observed across the entire Galactic Council, as billions of beings paused to remember the humans who died at New Haven. Henderson stood at the memorial afterward and looked up at the stars, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Earth had joined the Galactic Council expecting to be junior partners in a vast civilization, and instead, humanity had become a force for reform and justice. It had come at a terrible price, but the alternative would have been accepting injustice and teaching the galaxy that humans could be pushed around without consequence. Do you think it was worth it? Dr. Grant asked quietly, standing beside Henderson at the memorial. The people who died here did not have a choice, Henderson replied. But we chose to make their deaths mean something, and I believe we succeeded. He gestured toward the stars, where Council species were implementing the reforms that humanity had demanded. The galaxy is not perfect, Henderson continued, but it is better than it was, and that matters. Admiral Wright joined them at the memorial. Having traveled from her flagship to attend the ceremony, the fleet is receiving requests for joint patrols from 17 different species, she reported. They want human ships stationed in their territories as a deterrent against aggression. What did you tell them? Henderson asked. That we will consider each request based on whether it serves genuine peacekeeping purposes. Wright replied, we are not becoming mercenaries, but we will help maintain security for Council members who need it. The three of them stood together in silence, looking at the names carved into the memorial stone. Somewhere among those names were the families that Captain Morrison had tried to save, the medical staff that Dr. Grant had trained, and the people who had dreamed of building new lives among the stars. Their deaths had shaken the Galactic Council to its foundation, and from that tragedy had emerged a more just system that protected all species equally. It was not the outcome anyone had wanted, but it was an outcome that honored the victims by making the galaxy safer for everyone. As darkness fell over the memorial, lights began to appear around the monument. Small flames representing each of the 12,000 lives lost. Henderson watched the lights multiply until they filled the entire area with a soft glow. They will not be forgotten, he said quietly. No. Admiral Wright agreed, and the changes they brought will endure far across the galaxy. At Council headquarters, Councillor Chancellor viewed the latest cases submitted to the Justice Commission. She had just approved an investigation into a territorial dispute that had been ignored for years. And 3 smaller species were finally getting the hearing they deserved. The commission still had hundreds of cases to review, and the work would take years to complete. But for the first time in galactic history, justice was available to everyone. At Shaw looked at a photograph on her desk showing the memorial.